The Middle East, an exotic land of magic carpets, valuable oil, odd religions, and violent terrorism. Except not really. The Middle East has been plagued with a massive amount of disproportionate imagery due to Western media, perpetuating the harmful stereotype of mystique and war. However, this stereotype, like others, is exaggerated beyond measure and leads the Western world to focus on the differences between cultures instead of the similarities.
And believe it or not, there are an astounding number of similarities between Islam, the religion predominantly associated with the Middle East, and Judaism and Christianity, religions most associated with the Western world. To start, they all worship the same God. Christianity does believe in the Trinity, a unified single God that is represented by three spiritual forms called the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. However, that God is believed to be the same God that established the covenant with Abraham, who is considered the starting point to these three religions. Because of this, they are referred to as Abrahamic religions. Though most can trace the lineage of the Christian faith back to the start of Judaism, many fail to recognize that Islam can make that same claim to the man proclaimed to be the father of nations. Additionally, these religions hold many of the same morals and codes of conduct. For example, the first commandment, a set of conduct in Judaism and Christianity, states you shall worship the Lord your God and only him shall you serve, which is remarkably similar to the first pillar of Islam, which proclaims there is no God but God and Muhammad is the messenger of God. Also, all three religions hold the principles of giving to charity, not lying, not killing, and just generally being a nice person, which brings us to the thought bubble.
Many Westerners are familiar with the Ten Commandments, but what they often don't know is the 5 pillars of Islam. These are Shahada, or faith, which proclaims that there is only one God and that Muhammad is God's prophet. Salat, or prayer, which says that Muslims should pray 5 times a day at designated times facing Mecca, the holiest city of Islam. Zakat, or charity, refers to practice of charitable giving based on one's accumulated wealth and physical stability to those in need. It is outlined that all Muslims who are able should give 2.5% of their income to charity. Saum, or fasting, Muslims must fast during the month of Ramadan, not eating or drinking anything from dawn to dusk. The fasting is meant to draw Muslims closer to God. Hajj, or pilgrimage to Mecca. Mecca is considered the holiest city of Islam, and able Muslims are meant to journey there at least once in their lifetime. These pillars govern a Muslim's way of life, exactly like the 10 Commandments do for Judaism and Christianity.
Similarities between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity are abundant, but many still focus on the differences. This pulls us deeper into the ethnocentrism circle, meaning that we will become prejudiced against Islam, leading to stereotyping and discrimination. And considering the multitude of negative media given to Islam in the Middle East, it is not surprising that these negative stereotypes run rampant in Western society. Speaking of running rampant, we have the Mongols.
For God's sake, no pun intended.
Many associate Islam with violent acts of terrorism, which is another example of disproportionate imagery, further perpetuated by biased socialization factors such as news sources. Contrary to popular beliefs, most Muslims do not condone in blowing themselves up. And according to Pew Research Center, the idea of extremism are overwhelmingly and negatively received in most Muslim communities. Yes, we still see the majority of media portrayals of Muslim-centered news events focusing on the terrorism and negative aspects. But by failing to recognize the truth instead of believing this harmful stereotype, we surround ourselves with ungodly lies. And we Westerners all know the 8th commandment, right? Of course, there is violence in the Middle East, just like every other sect of the world. And to understand this violence, we must understand the history of the Middle East and why the anger exists toward Western countries.
Dear Europe, you know that period of time you call the Dark Ages? Well, for most other parts of the world, progress was not eclipsed by a cloud of emo-ness. They actually went on with their lives. Instead of succumbing to dull artwork and a life of despair, they did stuff. You sat in your metaphorical bedroom and cried about how sad your life was. And then you stole their ideas and called it the Renaissance. You are a menace to society. Please go home. Best wishes, everyone else.
The Middle East has always been extremely valuable, even before oil became necessary for world superpowers. For one, they had farming and domestication of animals pretty early on, which leads to a bunch of other things that people want, like the development of a written language, better weaponry, a surge in population, and the formation of a government and permanent societies. Insert joke here. Okay. Also, it's right between Europe, Asia, and Africa. This is advantageous for trade and for military positioning. Plus, 3 huge religions call this place the Holy Land. Now, these people disagree sometimes, which could be a bit of a problem when it comes to who is entitled to this land. According to all 3 religions, this land, specifically the land currently known as Israel and Palestine, is the land of Abraham's descendants.
Wait, I thought they were all descendants of Abraham.
Yes, they are, and this is where it all goes to hell. No pun intended. Much of the violence in the Middle East is a result of the Arab-Israeli conflict, a dispute over the land currently recognized as Israel. To understand this present conflict, we must first look at the history of this land, as well as both sides of the argument through a concept known as cultural relativism, which allows us to see both sides without a predetermined bias. Now for the thought bubble.
From 1299 to 1923, the Ottoman Empire controlled the Middle East and present-day Israel. When it dissolved, Britain took control of the land and made quite a few promises that they could not fulfill. They first promised in 1915 that the land would be given to the development of a free and independent Arab nation in exchange for an Arab uprising against the Ottoman Empire. At that time, World War I was raging on, and Britain was on the opposite side of the Ottoman Empire. If the Ottoman Empire had to fight an uprising in their own land, they would be less equipped to deal with outside threats. This was a common war strategy. In the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, the land occupied by the Ottoman Empire was divided up between France and Britain. Britain was promised control over the land that was known as Palestine. Essentially, in this agreement, they promised that they would maintain control over this land. Then in 1917, a letter called the Balfour Declaration pledged Britain's support for the Zionist movement, which was Jewish nationalism. They acknowledged that the Jewish people are entitled to a homeland and essentially promised them Palestine. This was a huge issue, as there were a ton of people already there who were not Jewish, but mostly Muslim, and who did not want to give up their land, which is outrageous, right? If it were me, I would totally want to give up my home and my country for just a bunch of foreigners. This led to a lot of confusion, and when Israel was eventually given to Jewish immigrants in 1948, the Arab Muslims who currently live there were left with a feeling of betrayal towards the Western world.
This feeling of betrayal has prompted some extremist groups from acting on their hatred and attacking the countries that have backed Israel. Closest to home, we have the incident on 9/11/2001, where extremists targeted the World Trade Center, killing 2,753 people to be exact. As America is the biggest backer of Israel, this attack was seen by the perpetrators as an act of defense for the right to the land they occupied before. This illustrates one of the major concepts of war, the belief that your side is right. Religious extremists don't just wake up one day and think, hey, I'm going to crash a plane into the World Trade Center. There is a reason, and understanding these reasons helps us from stereotyping the entire region or entire ethnicity. Though many Muslim Arabs are unhappy with U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, not all of them want to attack us. For most Muslim people, are rather peaceful and not violent, with modest viewpoints. This common stereotype is a result of disproportionate imagery and socialization factors by Western civilizations.
Failing to recognize the harmful effects of this stereotyping, or the many reasons why it can be proven unjustified, simply pulls the Western world farther into the ethnocentrism circle. Basically, when you begin to stereotype a culture, you are already thinking of them as less than you are and are failing to recognize them as a diverse group of people. This is worsened by America's tendency to view Islam as something foreign and weird, instead of recognizing that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are all descendants of Abraham and his religious beliefs and foundations. We fail to adopt a policy of cultural relativism as we focus primarily on the differences between cultures, which makes us even more ethnocentric. Many even view Islamic extremism and the work of groups such as ISIS as an attack on the largest religion in the world, Christianity. This is simply not true. Sure, Christians have been killed, but so have peaceful Muslims across the world. In fact, more Muslims are killed by ISIS than non-Muslims. This isn't us versus them. This is the world versus violence, in all its forms. Failure to recognize this leads to ethnocentrism, plain and simple. Thanks for tuning in to this Knockoff crash course, which is produced by Dara Parat, Jenna Nardo, Joseph Herringer, and Marie Mastandre.